All right. So good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. We'll just give a little bit of time for everyone to join in. My name is Pedro. I'm the founder and CEO at Bridgin. And today we'll talk about EOR versus subsidiary. What is the right expansion model for your business? So we expect to just do a small presentation, just a little bit of context. You should actually be seeing some slides already on the screen. So I'll go just through this for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open for questions. The goal here is really to be able to answer questions you might have. So there's a section that you should see with Q&A on the right of the screen. Make sure that you add the questions over there so that we can go through them as we get to that section of this webinar. So thanks again for joining. We'll give just a little bit more time for everyone to rolling in. We will also make sure to share snippets of this later on our social media. So don't forget to follow Bridgin on LinkedIn, or you can always also visit us on the website at bridgein.pt. All right, so let's probably start a little bit slower. So again, my name is Pedro. I'm the founder and CEO at Bridgin. And today on this webinar, we'll be talking about different paths for an expansion. So should you go with EOR or employer of record, or should you open a subsidiary? What is the right or, for you, the ideal expansion model? To recap, we will do a brief contextual presentation to share some, bits of information that will be helpful for the following discussion. You can leave questions on the right side of the screen. You should see a Q&A button, a little box with a question mark. You can leave there any questions you might have. This is the goal for today's webinar, is really to answer any questions you might have. So without further ado, we'll get started. So before anything really, I want to talk about who are we, right? So why do we believe that we are a bit of an authority in these matters, particularly if you want to expand your operation to Portugal and actually also to Spain. So that's one of the news since the last webinar. We now support both operation expansion to Portugal and Spain. And we do it with multidisciplinary team. You can see a lot of faces here and a lot of skills we have on the team, ranging from payroll, legal, accounting, but also obviously the team that prepared this webinar today, all of our marketing team, and then we have all the team around technology and the product that we are building to make a great experience to manage your company, without really needing to go with boring email and paperwork, really to digitize and automate that experience. So in essence, what Bridgin is a company that aims to digitize and automate the management of companies and the expansion that enables. And so you should think a bit of a legal, tax, accounting, and payroll tech business. A little bit more in terms of services really quickly without boring you too much. We have been working with companies, helping them build teams. So a lot of times what you need to be successful is to understand what can be your go-to-market strategy in terms of talent acquisition. So we do that, and we act more than recruitment partner. We act as a recruitment mediator. We actually interface and engage with several recruitment partners on your behalf, which greatly accelerated and increases our reach. The other that obviously is part of the discussion today is employer of record. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We can obviously help you to employ people without needing to establish a local entity through employer of record services. But time comes when you definitely want to have your subsidiary, either because of that's your company policy, or you might be concerned about some regulation, or even you just grew that presence in country to a size that it makes a lot more sense to actually have your own subsidiary. We can not only help you get started, dealing everything regarding corporation, but as well from that point on, what we call as a company as a service, which is help you manage your local subsidiary, again, with focus on legal, tax, payroll, accounting, and even fiscal incentives. It's really a broad amount of services that we cover, everything that you need to make sure that you are compliant, that you can focus on what creates business value for you and not the red tape. So we've been doing this for a lot of different countries and companies for different sizes, including really big companies, including public traded ones. Probably one of the best cases we have is a unicorn from Ireland that has about 140 people in Portugal right now. But then we also have smaller operations that everything sometimes starts small, right? But we do have plenty of other companies that start with a sort of a pod team with 5 or 6 contributors in that. So a lot of experience, a lot of different companies. We do focus mostly in tech companies, but there's no reason why we don't serve others. It's simply that obviously knowledge workers can pretty much work from any location. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to bother you too much. So let's just dive into the focus here on this call and talk a little bit more about EOR and CAS and the different opportunities from a go-to-market strategy that they present to you. And I guess a main one really is timing and timeline. And we get a lot of these questions, right? So what we are trying to depict here is bureaucracy is no fun. You still need to fulfill it. Obviously, you need to be on the right side of the law. And so there's plenty of things that need to be accomplished, a long laundry list of items to tick, which unfortunately do take time. So a custom built new subsidiary will take at the very least 3 months. You will probably, if you look, you research, particularly in Portugal, but also Spain, you can find articles that say that, oh, no, you can create a company in a matter of hours. And in reality, me, Portuguese citizen with a Portuguese citizen card, I can, if I want to somewhat pre-built company with a predefined name, yeah, I can have that company up and running in a matter of days. But if I don't want a pre-built name, if I'm not a resident or a citizen, that's not true. Most of the companies we work with are actually companies, not individuals. So there is a company outside the country that wants to have a subsidiary in Portugal. And so for that, the first thing is to make sure that the local government recognizes the foreign entity, the holding company. And so just on that, there's plenty of things to do, which I'll get really briefly in a little bit more detail. But don't take for granted what you might read online. In reality, unfortunately, establishing a company does take a little bit longer. And when I say 3 months, to be honest, I've seen a lot worse than that. Our team, well, I'm biased, I guess, but I think our team is pretty good, pretty great, and we can act very quickly. But there's still a few things that you simply cannot rush. You cannot rush governmental bodies. You cannot, make notaries and whatever move faster, right? You just need to cope with the timings. And so giving a little bit more insight into that and the different phases that we have highlighted here. If you want to go first with the route of establishing a company, the first thing you need to do, obviously, is to solve any dependencies and make all the necessary decisions. And key decisions here are, well, what will be the name of the company, what will be the share capital of the company, where will be the company headquartered, and all of that are very discrete and simple options. Obviously, there's plenty of co-working options where you can have a virtual address. We work with a bunch of co-working places ourselves. So that's fine. But then you get into other stuff, like who will be the managing director of a company in Portugal or in Spain? Does it need to be a resident? It doesn't. But that person still needs to be recognized. So the first thing you need is to register that person, make sure that it has a fiscal number in the country. And for that to be achieved, you do need to have a lot of documentation. You can either come in into the country, yourself directly, or you can sign a power of attorney. In Portugal, getting a fiscal number is done at public registry. In Spain, is actually done at the police stations, which does not make necessarily for a great experience to be there on a queue with all sorts of the people that are there for different reasons. So you typically, want to delegate this to someone through a power of attorney, but then you need to have that power of attorney prepared. That well, we could do that for you, our lawyers, but you need to make sure that it gets recognized, the signature, and if it's done abroad, it also needs to be apostille. So just that, even if you are very diligent, it will take at least several days to a few weeks, and that's only to submit the request for your fiscal number. The company also needs a fiscal number. So, all of these things, it's 1 week here, 1 week there. So very easy for it to take 4 to 6 weeks just in preparation. The actual incorporation is a little bit quicker because it's, a couple of well-defined steps, assuming that all the dependencies were solved. So we just need to get name admissibility, we need to submit the articles of incorporation, and after it's incorporated, we need to file information about the ultimate beneficiary. But then things are not done yet, right? So you might have a company. One of the other things, or what we have here as post-incorporation subsidiary readiness check, that can take from 1 week to actual several months, and the several months is actually the most painful bit here have been lately banks. Portugal is a little bit more difficult than Spain here, but essentially what we find is companies sometimes, banks, I should say, sometimes have a hard time to validate all the holding structures, particularly if your organization has a very complex holding structure, maybe with funds or funds owning it. And so going through all the due diligence can take a lot of time. A lot of information is requested. We've been successful navigating this, but it can take time, right? So the simplest your organization is, the quickest it is to typically have a bank account. And you might ask, why do I want a bank account in Portugal? Can I not use one of those online systems? And there's two reasons why that's not an amazing idea, at least as your primary or unique bank account. One is for you to pay taxes in Portugal while running your company, you pretty much either go on site or you use the home banking in Portuguese banks that have special, transfer types. It's not a typical SEPA or IBAN transfer. It's a specific payment that you can really only do from a Portuguese traditional home banking. The other thing is, for most services, it is still recommended and sometimes only possible to have a Portuguese account number. For instance, some insurance companies still block a Portuguese company from having a foreign IBAN number. So it can take a little bit, but obviously it's important to make sure that your company is ready. Then in darker red, what you see there is really the last step, which is ramp up your HR operations and, onboard any contributors that you might have lined up. And the ramp up part, which is, what takes a little bit more, is make sure that you fulfill all legal obligations regarding employment. And so this is, in Portugal, you need by law to offer workers' compensation insurance, not mandatory, but expected to also offer private health insurance to employees. Not mandatory, but also very expected to offer a meal allowance, which is an amount, per day of work that they'll receive free of tax. For you to maximize the amount that is free from tax, you need to use a platform, use a sort of prepaid card, so you need to enroll on that. So again, nothing too crazy, but not things that you can then do within one day, right? It takes a couple of days to get done. And then, more importantly, you need to sign work contracts with contributors. You should not, absolutely not, have anyone start with you without a work contract established. A bit of a word here as well. By default, if you don't have any work contract in place, a permanent work arrangement is considered by the government. And what, for good or bad, after the probation period, that contract is considered permanent. So unless there is, severe reason that provides just cause, you might not actually be able to terminate the engagement with such employee. So if you, have this need, that might be a temporary one to employ someone. Well, you need to be very careful with that. Again, obviously, if you by any reason decide to work with us, we can help you with all of that. But word here, make sure that you understand the issues and the liability that comes with that. The other thing that we sometimes get is people that want to, found someone in Portugal and they just want to use them as contractors. And this can be also a bit of a problem because if someone is working for you at your hours under your direction, they are pretty much a dependent worker. And so if they are being a contractor, there is a misclassification of independent worker that can carry fines up to 60K. So make sure that you don't get into trouble later on. But this is not a webinar about legal and employment contracts, so I'll keep going here. Only after all of this is that you get into the steady state. Now, if you want to compare this, what is the approach with an EOR? It's basically less than 1 week. And why? Because obviously a EOR provider, as Brigitte, we already have a company established. We already have all the arrangements regarding mandatory insurances. Obviously, we have all the bank accounts needed to operate. So the only thing we need to onboard someone is sign the work contract, which we also have good templates to go around, and do the statutory onboarding. Right? We like to give it 1 week, but we've done with emergency onboardings within 24 hours. So one will take months, the other will take few days. So there's a big difference here. Now, strategic decisions such as expanding to a new country, shouldn't be just because of timing, but it's really important that you understand the differences in timing. Now, just a bit of a laundry list. I won't spend too much time here. Already a lot of this is spoken, but we do a lot to make sure that companies are ready to trade, from all the fiscal representation, all the name admissibilities, all the activity codes, open activity with the tax authorities, open activity with Social Security, the ultimate beneficiary registration. So there's obviously a lot of bureaucracy. We narrowed it down to a very optimized and automated process. But well, if you do it yourself, you obviously will go in for a ride. Now, what I wanted to just introduce today is a different concept. And we've been using this with a lot of companies, I believe, in a very successful way, which is sometimes you might need to be fast to the market because you found someone that you want to employ, or you just can't wait 1 quarter, potentially 2, to start an operation. But at the same time, your goal or your end goal is not to use a EOR and a third-party co-employment solution, but employ people directly. And that's very fair. And we actually have a lot of those situations. So one of the solutions we offer is this EOR to CAS, or a transition. So, we start the two things at the same time. So if you want, let's say, to onboard someone next week, after we sign, the service agreement, we can employ that person on your behalf through employer of record. But if you want to establish your company and you're already committed with that, you can at the same time start working towards incorporation. Once the corporation is ready, without rushing anything, without cutting any corners for speed, your team can transition to the new code that it's a subsidiary of yours. So this both ensures that on a medium term you have potentially the setup you want, but that you don't lose 1 to 2 quarters with red tape and paperwork. This stepped approach can also be very important in a different way, which is a lot of companies we work with obviously, if they never employed someone in Portugal or Spain, they have questions. Can we find the people we need? How will they have a cultural fit with our staff in other places? And so the EOR model actually enables you with to mitigate your risk in the expansion. You don't need to go in, fully commit to open a subsidiary and spend months doing it. You can actually let's bring in a few contributors, see how they work. If they work, we'll eventually continue to add to that team, and it will come to a point, most likely a critical mass, that okay, no, this is working out great. We want to establish a legal entity and move everyone under that legal entity. And we actually have done that exact path with multiple companies. And so you can think of this as a really low effort, low time, very fast and efficient way to get started, to bring people you might need, and to build the operation around that capacity, if and when you are comfortable and you believe that is a good fit for your company. I'll share just a quick example here. This is a public case, so I can talk about it. We work, one of our earliest customers is Design Pickle. And when we started working together, they had no one in Portugal. We helped them build one pod team, so a software engineering team with software engineers. That team grew to 6 people, and they decided, okay, this is good, very successful. By the way, they did had previously had bad experiences in other geographies. And I don't think necessarily that was a talent matter, because there's great talent, great people everywhere. But if you don't have the right setup, sometimes you can engage with an outsourcing partner or whatever, whose financial incentives are not necessarily to provide a great service for you, but actually to lock you in and to pay the least they can to their contributors while billing you the most they can. By the way, EOR as a co-employment solution is much better than that, because everything is transparent. You know exactly how much your team is making. You actually make the decision on how much to pay them. So as you can see, much better. Anyway, back to Design Pickle here. We built that team. They were very happy with it. We started a company for them. We transitioned everyone in, and we continue to help them ensure that we fulfill all obligations, from monthly payroll and month's end on the accounting side to end of the year procedures, HR reports that the government asks, really everything. So it's great peace of mind. Has been a great partnership, and we even had an interesting article on Forbes highlighting their experience opening the hub in Portugal. Now, very last notes here. If you are still considering, okay, but why should I care about Portugal? Well, Portugal, and let's face it, Spain, this is actually not updated yet, but as I recall, Bridgin is now operating both in Portugal and Spain. Both countries are actually, there's a bit of always discussion about politics nowadays, but both countries are still fairly stable. The locations are, pretty premium, both in a good intersection between Europe and the United States, because, Portugal is the closest time zone and geography that you can have with the Americas. There's great talent, good STEM education. And then one that is also very important is that culturally, there's a Western culture, so there's great cultural fit, good welcoming nature. I hope that most of you here in the attendance have already been able to have some time in either Portugal or Spain and enjoyed it. And if you did, you'll know that very welcoming. They are both countries that have a lot of tourism, so they understand that receiving people, it's very, very important, and it's good for the local economies. So that's pretty much it. I actually went a little bit above the time, but hopefully that was good information. I'll just leave this slide in so that you can also visit us after this if relevant. You have also a QR code that you can scan and go directly to schedule a meeting with us. Or you can also visit us at bridgin.pt or email us at hello@bridgin.pt. Again, my name is Pedro Henriques. I'm the founder and CEO at Bridgin. And thanks so much for everyone that joined today. We'll jump right to questions. So, All right, let's see. Okay, first one. I'm working with an outsourcing company. Isn't the same as EOR. Right. No. Well, depends on the outsourcing company, obviously, right? I will tell you that my background is software engineering. I've been a software engineer myself, so I have actually worked over 10 years in IT consultancy and outsourcing companies, and I know very well the ins and outs. What I can tell you is think for a bit of the incentives of that company, right? Typically, an outsourcing company, what it does is they find good talent that they assign to a project. That project can be either 6 months project predefined, or could be just an ongoing assignment, sometimes at the customer office. Whatever the case, the outsourcing company charges a daily rate for your work, right? And then they pay you a salary. So what is the business model? What is the incentive of the outsourcing company? Is to have the biggest margin from your salary to the rate they charge the customer. So really basics, the incentive of your employer, if that's an outsourcing company, is they only exist because they pay you less than they can bill the customer, right? So it is a losing proposition to the contributors. And this is something really close to my heart. For me, in an ideal world, there would be no outsourcing companies because they just provide, arguably a necessary, in a way, service, but mainly because bureaucracy, right? When I sat and started Bridging, one of the main goals was how can we remove bureaucracy and red tape from being a barrier, right? Because no one, I think, deserves to get in the short side of employment relationship where you are the weakest link. Besides that, outsourcing, there is also the mindset in which typically companies engage with that. There's plenty of stories out there. Hopefully, it's not your case, Evelyn, but there's plenty of stories out there where a big company has some employees that they employ directly, and then they do staff augmentation with an outsourcing company, and so they have other contributors. Both might be in the office. Some are direct employees, some are not, and then sometimes there's an event, there's a benefit, there's a T-shirt, a new pen, whatever, and the employees get it, and the outsource contributors do not. So that essentially creates a dynamic that you're a second-grade employee. Not only you're being ripped off in terms of salary, but you're also treating as second-grade employee. So yeah, it's very different. And with EOR, employee of record, none of that exists because the companies that engage with such model, they want to employ people directly. They want you to be integral part of their team. The reason why they use a third party is simply because they cannot employ you in the country, but they get back-to-back exposure to employment risks and liability. So they are not trying to dodge their responsibilities. They are just trying to mitigate, obviously, bureaucracy and not let red tape inhibit their expansion. So this, again, long answer here, but this is really close to my heart. I believe it's tremendously different, both in terms of the experience you have, the financial incentives. It's really bad when you know that your employer financial incentive is against your own best interest. And so, no, it's definitely not the same. All right, next one. Do I have to be physically in Portugal to open a company? All right. So you don't, if you sign a power of attorney for someone to do that for you. So, nothing fancy about it. You just delegate powers. Now, opening the bank account is actually the easy part because governmental, fast or slow, they work, they function, they recognize, power of attorneys, done, obviously well done. The one thing that has still been a little bit harder are banks. Again, same reason I talked a little bit before. They, obviously banks got a lot of regulation with, all they need to have the know your customer, understand the ultimate beneficiary and all of that. But I feel in a way they are still stuck to the old ways. They like to see people and have people sign paperwork in front of them. So the hardest thing not to do physically is probably to open the bank account. So in an ideal world, if you can, be in the country 1 2 days just to sign some paperwork, you would save also a lot of other paperwork that you would need to do your home country, because you could at least avoid some power of attorney, some recognition. So you don't need to be physically in Portugal. It would help if you can, but totally fine to establish a company without it if you do use a power of attorney. All right. And the next one, in an EOR situation, which company name is shown to clients? All right, so not sure I get the full extent of that question, but the dynamic we see with all the companies we serve is, if you are employed through us on an employer of record setup, legally and formally, you are employed through Bridgin, but you are working on a daily basis to the end customer. So you should feel part of that company. I would definitely advise you to put on CV, LinkedIn, whatever, that company. Bridgin makes no effort whatsoever wanting to make you feel part of Bridgin. No, you should feel fully part of the company. The employment is just a bureaucratic solution to make sure that you get all of your rights. You have a local work contract. You have social security protection if you get sick or whatever. You have all the discounts. You have workers' compensation, insurance if by any reason you sustain an injury. So you get all the protections. You get all the legal framework done, but you should focus and feel part of the end company. All right. Next one. Do you support stock or token rewards to the talent? That's a great one. So that's, well, easy answer, probably not, but really depends on the setup. So I'll elaborate. Thanks for the question, by the way, Katerina. Really good one. Most of the times, right? If you think of a company that has a presence either worldwide or in multiple countries, it could be a company original from United States, from United Kingdom, any other country really, and they decide to have a team in Portugal by whatever reason, and they might want to have a subsidiary or they might want to use Bridgin as an employer of record. Okay, that's irrelevant for the answer. You don't want to have stock from the Portuguese subsidiary, if that exists. You want to have stock from the holding company that has all the IP, right? And that's totally possible to do, right? So the EOR versus subsidiary discussion in Portugal or Spain, it's pretty much irrelevant for ESOP, employee stock option pool, that the company might want to offer, because they would offer from the holding company, the parent company, not the child company. And with tokens, it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? Right? They can issue whatever they want from the parent company. Our goal, again, is to make sure that employment law is fulfilled, that you are employed correctly, the right way, with all the supposed and expected regulations match. Again, social security, insurances, paying the taxes, even if they're a little bit high, but they are what they are. So yeah, there's no reason why you can't have stock or tokens rewards as a contributor, because you want to receive them from the parent company, not the subsidiary. All right. How's the crypto legislation now? Is Portugal still a good place for crypto? All right. So the latest I've seen, typically the regulations, I believe, and maybe we need to have our legal team to follow up on that one. But if I'm updated on it, basically the regulations passed were around short, fast trading, or day traders and anyone that holds and sells their position within 1 year. So if you are doing that, now you have tax on crypto gains. But if you buy and hold for over 1 year, you shouldn't have. So it's a bit of a hybrid situation, not as good as it once was, that there was no tax on gains at all. Now it is a little bit different. Also note that this is so on an individual level, because if on a company level, you need to always assess the value of the assets and pay tax on any asset value appreciation. But on the individual level, if you buy and hold, Portugal is still a pretty good place. Now, arguably, crypto is fairly fungible. So, if you sold, did you sold the one that you bought 2 years ago or the one that you bought 6 months ago? You can find with which wallet, I guess, eventually. But yeah, it's tricky to measure, right? What I would say is, if you want to do day trading, prepare to pay tax. If you are more long on crypto, you shouldn't worry too much. All right. And next one, can an accountant do the same as you, like manage HR and company? Thanks, Evelyn. That's a great question. So they could, absolutely, but there's tremendous problems. So a bit of a story. And I feel I always tell a story to your question. So bear with me for a little bit. Part of the reason why Bridging now exists was because I had the need to create a company, and nobody knew what to answer me regarding cross-border taxation and transfer pricing discussions. Now, obviously, if I went with the big four, they probably wouldn't know, right? But I was a small, I guess, entrepreneur, small company, so I don't necessarily wanted to pay the big bucks or could afford it. So I went, with the typical smaller, smaller, not that small. I'm talking, dozens of actually accountants in there, and they are so used to do accounting to simple shops, cafes, restaurants, maybe clothes boutique, whatever. Uh, yeah, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but they're really poor in the quality of service they provide. So could they do the same we do? Pretty much. Can they do it? Not really. And then we are missing the whole automation and technology bit, right? So we provide all of these services, but we provide all of them with an increasing level of automation. And that's why we have software engineers on the team. And accounting firms don't, right? So they do everything manually, right? And manually has the problem of, is it right? Do you know accounting? No, you trust your accountant. But if the accountant is doing the wrong thing, how can you tell? I know a very close case, not naming names as you might imagine, but an accountant that because they did not file the right, expenses, because you do need to obviously present VAT invoices of company expenses, they had an efficiency of 50K. That's 50,000 euros in tax that was paid that should have not been paid. So, do you want to go with an accountant and then you lose 50K in taxes? They can do. There's good and bad also, right? But you cannot guarantee that they will provide a good service, because you cannot validate what they do. They are the experts. So Bridging also changes that. How? Because of the automation, right? We have algorithms, processes in place that the algorithm is correct. So it's not dependent on a single accountant to forget to do something. No, the algorithm will make sure that things follow procedures, nothing gets dropped. So it seems the same. They could emulate, replicate us, but they do not have the technical ability. They don't have the service mindset, service quality mindset. And yeah, it's a different paradigm altogether. So automation, predictability, standardization is why we are so different from regular mom and pop accounting shop. All right, next one. And thanks for all the questions. This is great. How does Portugal tax system benefit new tech startups and foreign businesses? Well, a bit, I guess. So there's a few Portugal as Spain and a few other countries, I guess, in Europe have been trying to attract tech businesses, right? So that's only fair. Everyone, I think, recognizes the importance of technology in improving, not only the value-added services but the economy as a whole. Are they relevant though? And that's the big question. So what I can still tell you is, if you ask me, should I go to Portugal? and start a multinational operation with several subsidiaries and have Portugal as the holding for all those subsidiaries, I will tell you that's possible. Keep an eye on some potential news we'll have regarding lower tax brackets. That could be interesting. But for now, also take a look in other geographies, right? From a point of maturity in holding regulations, but also from a tax efficiency perspective, I have some questions if Portugal is currently the best. Now, at the same time, there, like I said, there are an increasing number of benefits. Like there were some regulations around stock options, for instance, gains from it, tax around it. There's obviously incentives like if you start R&D tech hub to do innovative products, you can have tax, grants, non-referable grants, but also tax breaks afterwards. But you actually do not need to have a holding company to do that, right? So Portugal or Spain from an operating company, very good. There's plenty of interesting incentives because they focus mostly on the creation of highly qualified jobs. Now, for a holding structure, maybe not the goal. So does it provide incentives for creation of highly qualified jobs? Yes, that's great. Great. All countries I think are trying to do that, and obviously Portugal and Spain are also amongst the ones that do it. All right. So next one we have what is the difference between foreign employer setup and employer of record? What is the cheapest? Employer of record fees are generally quite high. Yes, and they are for a reason. So there's a lot of gotchas here. Employer of record, as the name suggests, someone is the employer on the record on your behalf, right? For an employer, on the other hand, you or a foreign entity that you own is the employer of the staff. So right there you have huge difference, which is liability, right? So what happens if there is a problem, you need to find a way to terminate the work contract if the employee starts to with reason or without reason to litigate against you and you're dragged to a court of law. If you are the foreign employer, well, you need to go. If you use an employer of record, the employer of record is liable. So first and foremost, there's a significant liability difference. Now, imagine that you are a foreign employer, you are, I don't know, maybe in the UK, maybe in Germany, right? And then you have an employee in Portugal and they don't like anything, they did something wrong, you decide to terminate the work contract, he doesn't believe that you had just cause, he drags you to court, a little bit on that, assume that he wins. And by the way, courts in Portugal can sometimes take a little bit longer than ideal. So imagine that this process drags for 2 years, right? And in the end of the 2 years that you're not paying salary, the employee wins. Not only you were dragged to be in Portugal, you needed to find Portuguese lawyers to help you in court, but you can also be liable to pay 2 years of salaries for all the time the process was unfolding and needing to readmit that employee as a contributor. Full employment liability. If you use an employer of record, well, it's different. It is true that employer of records do have clauses to share some of the liability, but ultimately the employer of record is responsible and liable. They are the ones that would need to go in court and defend their position. So right there, huge difference. The second important aspect is if you use an employer of record, you probably get a monthly invoice with the salary to be paid, plus plus some expenses that were reimbursed, plus your fees, right? So from your management perspective, it's a invoice, period, right? You get an invoice, you pay it, done. If you are on a foreign employer setup, you need to pay Social Security, mandatory insurances, any benefits, and do the withholding tax on the personal income tax. How do you do it? Well, you need to find someone that do it. We do it, by the way. We also do for an employer. We don't love the setup, and I'm trying to explain why, but we can do it. The other problem, as I mentioned earlier with banks, is okay, so now you need to pay Social Security. How do you pay Social Security? You, let's say you're back in Germany. So how do you pay Social Security for a contributor in Portugal? You either have a bank account on Portugal or you can't. You need to come inside to Social Security and pay it. So, okay, let's open a bank account. You can't. You're a foreign entity. You'll have a very hard time, if possible. I actually don't know a case where that was possible. So you need to pay someone to pay something on your behalf. So it's a very suboptimal setup. Does it work? Yes. Is it compliant? Yes. You have way more liability and you have way more trouble with the setup. And that's why it is cheaper, because you have the liability shifts to you. So, less liability, people can do it for cheaper. And, more problems and trouble and processing trouble for you. So, you're paying less and you get a worse service, essentially. Right. So next we have, why would you choose Portugal over any other country when taxation is so high? In the UK, as an employer, I have to contribute like 13%, while in Portugal, it's closer to 30%. Right. Good question. Again, Evelyn. So actually, it's more than that. So bit on that, the total Social Security contribution is 11% on the employee side and 23.75% on the employer side. So aggregate 34.75%. Then the employee also gets personal income tax deducted, and there's the mandatory insurances, blah blah blah, which adds typically around 1% more. Now, every country is different, right? While we've been opening the operation in Spain, Spain is different from Portugal, right? What you need to realize is a few things. So, first of all, in Portugal, Social Security covers unemployment benefit and pension, right? So you don't need to pay for pension or have a contribution or help the employee save for a rainy day or one retirement. Social Security insures pension, and currently, if it doesn't change, and arguably it might, with obviously the population getting older, people get a huge percentage of their salary. So it's not like they have a cap. No, it's based on what they pay taxes on. So big part of that high benefit is big part of that higher tax is arguably benefit for the employee. So you're just moving things from a pension benefit or whatever you might have to the contribution to the Social Security. So that's one. More relevant discussion is eventually the personal income tax, right? Because arguably that's of no benefit. It's just taxes for the country to work. And indeed, I would say there that the problem with Portugal is not necessarily the percentage on the higher tiers, is the speed in which you achieve a higher tier. Why? Because the average salary in Portugal is still fairly low. So what is, for instance, I'll use again tech. What is a fair and common salary for, let's say, a senior front-end full stack developer? Gets a pretty steep personal income tax bracket. But that is because comparing on average with the average salary, that salary is significant above average. And this is where you should focus, not on the taxes, which is, sure, taxes are higher, but what do you care? What you should care is, what is the ROI I have on a contributor, right? When you hire someone, you expect that employee to produce value for the business, correct? So what is my total cost of this person, including all taxes, all insurances, everything, which is, by the way, things that we do very frequently to our customers to help them understand that. So what is all the cost and what is the ROI he produces, right? So, salaries in Portugal are lower than in UK. So maybe for the same cost, right, you get better or same experienced people. The other thing that I feel is underappreciated, salaries in Portugal, because of all the ability to work remotely, from your home to anywhere, salaries in Portugal have gone a bit up, and I think the whole Europe is pretty close. So there aren't as much potential savings as once were, unless you come from if you come from Switzerland, maybe Norway, obviously North America, particularly the US, there's still significant savings. But if you're comparing Portugal or Spain with maybe the Netherlands, there's not crazy amount of savings. But there's something else that is very relevant, and I don't think it's talked enough, which is given that the average salary in Portugal, and unfortunately to the Portuguese, that the average salary in Portugal is significantly lower than in other countries, such as the UK, the same salary goes a long way, right? So what that means is even if a software engineer ends up costing the same in Portugal, which I don't think it does, everything in, but let's say that eventually costs you exactly the same in Portugal and in the UK. And let's assume you made a good selection, so you have a very good contributor in Portugal and a very good contributor in the UK. The contributor in Portugal most likely not leave as much as the UK will. Why? Because the financial motivation to seek a new job is not as strong. Why? Because the average cost of living is lower, right? So the fact that, unfortunately, again, for Portuguese, there's a lower cost. Well, lower cost of living is good, lower salaries is not, right? But, essentially, the fact that, with the European level salary, you can have a better life in Portugal with more money in the pocket, means that people will not leave your company to seek a 5-10% increase in salary in other company. And that's very true to all the companies we watch. One of the great things they found is tremendous retention of talent or low churn. I can give an example. Probably around 100 or so people that we acted as a recruitment mediator, I believe we had less than 5% churn. I actually only recall three contributors that left. So that's very significant. So same cost, same ROI, but way more retention. What is the cost of you to replace someone, right? So looking at taxation, I think is a very simple analysis to it. But it is true, and we have, arguably our current government is, got elected promoting or promising to lower it. We shall see if that happens. So I'm not saying it is not a problem. I just think that it's just one data point as many others. Okay, so we have 7 minutes left. I see we still have a couple of questions. I'll try maybe to speed up so that we can take a couple more. How long does it take to open a bank account? I heard it's tough. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right. So if you're a Portuguese and you want to open a bank account, easy. If you're personally, if you're a Portuguese owner and managing director of a Portuguese entity, a little bit of work, but still fairly quickly. We are talking, a few weeks. If you are Portuguese with shareholders, maybe you have a startup, you got invested, the funds have a significant percentage of your company, it gets trickier because you need to identify all the cap table, the ultimate beneficiaries, who owns what. So it gets lengthier. And what we found is sometimes, in all honesty, I feel bank clerks simply don't want to go through the trouble, right? Because in their eyes, and this is my perception, in their eyes, the small, basic, boring local company pays the same bank fees as the more promising, important business that is disrupting and improving the world, but still pays the same fees with a lot more due diligence needed, right? So I think they try to actually not that motivated to go through. Now, the worst case is if you have non-residents, and particularly if you have, and I must address it, if you have Russian citizens, it can be next to impossible to open a bank account in Portugal. I'm not saying that it's great, not saying that I agree. It is what it is. Obviously, there's some rules in place from the European Union, and yes, so opening the bank account can be hard. We are always on top of this. What I can tell you is We even got communication to the governor of the Bank of Portugal to try to, expose how, bad, poor the situation is. It will no doubt get better, but yeah, you need to account for it, right? I'm not here sugarcoating anything. What we a lot of times do, and obviously Regine is also always providing solutions, is you can have a bank account, one of those online banks, Revolut for Business, for instance. You do have the problem of not having the Portuguese IBAN and not be able to pay tax. We can, do that for you until the bank account is open, right? So that enables to try to mitigate the problems. But yeah, you are true. It is not trivial. Unfortunately, some banks do create a little bit more difficulties, And I should say we work with 6 different banks. They are kind of all the same, Here and there, some are better than others, but none is amazing. So they all have a lot of due diligence processes that take a little bit longer. All right, next one. Someone mentioned the NHR here in the comments. Can we discuss this? Yes. So, non-habitual residence was an amazing program where you could come to the Portugal if you're not a tax resident and benefit from a capped personal income tax of 20%. I wish I could have that for myself. Um, that program, because of some speculation that was causing uh, real estate and house prices to go up, they paused the bit that was associated. Oh no, sorry, I'm messing up topics. There's another topic, which is the golden visa, right? The golden visa was a visa that you could get, if you buy an expensive piece of property, you could get a visa. So a lot of people actually did both. So there was this association, but correlation does not mean causation. Anyway, NHR is somewhat limited now, but we do have a new government, so we need to wait a little bit and see what is coming up next. Not guarantee, but it was a great program. Hopefully it will become available in the same conditions. Oh, I need to answer this one. Any success case amongst your customers? Absolutely. Well, I would say only success cases. So a metric that I'm really proud of is we have 0% voluntary churn, meaning no customer that still needed our services left. We did have one case, they left, but they came back very quickly. And I think that's a very good sign of the quality of service we provide. For me, and this is something I tell everyone on Bridgine, quality is not negotiable, right? We need to make sure that we also have, a good value proposition in terms of financial terms, but delivering a subpar service is not acceptable. The other thing here, and a very popular tech entrepreneur said to move fast and break stuff. We don't, because what we are doing here cannot be broken. We cannot mess up accounting. We cannot mess up payroll, right? So we move at a fast yet fair pace that we can ensure top quality services to our customers. Sorry, not naming names. We have, on the slides, we mentioned Design Pickle, which is public known and we can mention. But a lot of the others, we have NDAs and we don't like to name drop without, getting the consentiment. But yeah, I can tell you that we have, unicorn valuation scale ups from multiple countries. We do have public traded companies as customers. Again, some bigger, some smaller operations. But yeah, very happy customers. That is one of the highlights of any day for us. All right, so I guess 1 minute left, so time really for just one last question. Are there any R&D incentives in Portugal or Spain? Yeah, so I already addressed that. You do have grants for R&D innovation projects, and there's also a running incentive called CFeed that is a tax break post-fact. So I guess time for one more. What's the AI scene like in Lisbon? Is there a good talent? It is growing for sure. So there's a few verticals that there's political and they have been, creating momentum. one that happened in the last few years were definitely anything around crypto and blockchain. Given there were no tax gains, that in solutions on top of blockchain. So that's definitely a hotspot. We also had a significant interest in gaming. So companies and studios doing games. We see a bit of an emerging hub, and AI I think is probably the newest from all of those. Oh, by the way, we also have in fintech. That's also probably even prior to the crypto craze. AI is probably the newest, but one of the great things, and I'll leave this, we are out of time here, I'll leave this with this thought. Portugal and Spain are generally great countries to live. Fairly secure, good weather, good food, right? Bureaucracy is not necessarily great, but if you have a good partner such as Brigitte, you just go through it, you get it done, and you don't worry too much. The fact that they are good countries to live, what that makes is when you can live from any location because you are flexible, you are remote first, whatever. We've seen tremendous amount of highly qualified people coming from the United States, coming from Israel, coming from UK, coming from Ireland, Norway, coming to Portugal, and they bring with them experience and knowledge. So a lot of that AI scene is both homegrown and grown by a number of people coming into the country. And so that is just making both countries actually, very interesting hotbeds into what will happen next. Because if you have a place where people want to be at, they'll be at that place and they will build things at that place. Anyway, we need to wrap it up. This flew by really fast. Thanks everyone for making the time and join here today. We'll keep running these webinars. They are very successful. I hope this was also successful and interesting to you. So thanks again for joining. And follow us. I have here the contact still on the screen. My name is Pedro, CEO and founder at Regine. Thanks for joining today. Follow us up.